morning, everybody. I am standing here in beautiful Knoxville. It is not even raining today. So what you're going to kind of get a glimpse of some great horticulture from around the state today. Our topic is going to be broadly early season pest and disease issues in the vegetable garden and the fruit orchard. And so this is our June Tuesday topic, and you're going to be hosted really by the entire home fruit and vegetable work group. So you're going to get to see some perspectives from around the state, some PowerPoints, some out in the field, and we're really excited that you're able to join with us today. So just to give you a little bit of idea of what our outline and our agenda is going to be, we're going to start with Seth Whitehouse, who is, I'm going to say, the new ag agent in Anderson County, but he is actually in the office just a little bit north and a tiny bit, I guess, west of here. And so Seth has an entomology background, and he's going to lead us off with some scouting and some entomology details to get started. Then we are going to head to the Cumberland County and see the plateau. Greg Upchurch is live in his family orchard and vineyard, and so he's going to talk some about some of the early season pests and disease issues that he's dealing with right now, how he's spraying, and some really practical information. And then we're going to come back here to Knoxville, and we're going to show you a little bit about our plots. I'm going to share some of the pest and disease issues that, you know, we always keep our eye on in the vegetable trials here. So you're kind of going to get a live glimpse of all of those things. Before we get started, I'll give Greg, who's in the field, if he wants to wave and say hello to start the morning. I'll also introduce Brooke Cadle, who is in our trial plots here in Knoxville. She's a plant sciences senior who is working with me this summer, so she's going to be the person who's in our field plots today. So, hey, Greg, what's happening in Cumberland County?
Everything is good here. You all just let me know if and when I'm coming in loud and clear or not coming in loud and clear. And I'm going to walk you through some of the orchard today and do a little bit about some of that in-season spray program and some other things, talk to you about some basics that from a spray program that you need to be aware of and need to be implementing in your spray program. So glad to see everybody online this morning.
All right, perfect, Greg. Thanks for saying hello. Brooke, do you wanna say hey from the field?
Yeah. Hey, I'm Brooke. I'm an intern at the Extension office this summer, and I work for Natalie. I'm in my car right now, but I'm right next to the field, so my phone doesn't die during this meeting. And so I'll be giving you a tour of our trial plots this summer, and if you've done anything with the home garden variety trials, that's what we're trialing out here. So you'll get to see those up close and personal.
All right, perfect. Thank you very much. We also have Melody and Lee and Darby and Bob and the rest of the crew on here, so hopefully you'll get to be hearing from different folks. Well, without any further ado, and with those introductions, you guys have been putting your names and counties in the chat box, and that's awesome. Keep telling us where you're coming in from. We're really glad that everybody could join us, and I'm going to turn the floor over to Seth to kick us off with some scouting and entomology in the early season fruit and vegetable garden.
Thank you, Natalie. I'm excited, guys. So we'll get it started here, and to give us a little overview of insect scouting, and I like to start with a few comics here that if I can, and the one here on the right is a little Sherlock Holmes, because I like to remind everyone, you know, it's kind of fun going out in the garden and kind of scouting for different pests and you know, maybe clues that you might see in your garden or your orchard. So this might be our Greg Upchurch here on the right. He might not have the hat on, but he's got everything right there. So and you know, early season pests that might be coming up, it's almost like the battle has just begun, really, is you know, keeping a eye out for anything before populations might be getting a little out of hand. And if you look here on the left side of the screen, you can kind of see, you know, we're kind of a pest to the bugs, right? So they're kind of looking out for the gardener to prevent us from, you know, taking away any of their food too. So this is kind of what I mean when we're kind of in this ever-going battle here. And so to begin, let's see if we can, there we go. Just a little bit of tips as we go through here. you know, when we're out in the field, it's not like we're looking at every single plant that we might have in our garden, right? It's often, you know, maybe an X pattern, a Z pattern. Pick an alphabet letter and try to make a pattern through that garden to see, you know, if you can find any signs of these pests. And it's good to do this at least once or twice a week. You know, we're not all perfect like Dr. Baumgartner or Melody going through the garden every day. But sorry to call you out, but at least once or twice a week is always a good recommendation. Another thing is to check the entire plant, not just the bird's eye view, but, you know, also checking the underside, seeing if there's any egg masses, you know, for example, a squash bug egg mass that you can see, stink bug egg mass, or even just aphids along the stem. A lot of the pests can also, you know, show signs of, you know, the plant saying, hey, I'm being eaten, shows signs of discoloration there as well. So this is a few things that we're looking for. And it's always good to come prepared when you go out to the garden, and, you know, either bring a little baggie with you to collect samples, or maybe I like to bring out a little mason jar to put any insects I might find for my collection. And, you know, also taking great pictures as we go through the garden too, because, you know, if we're trying to get advice from our other master gardeners or other agents in the state, it's always good to have a good picture to, you know, it's worth 1,000 words. So the three clues to keep on that Sherlock Holmes kind of theme that we have here is the first one, of course, is what is the host plant, right? So when we're going through the garden, some pests are more ideal to be eating on a certain plant than another. So if we have our, you know, carrot pest, our legume pest, our tomato pest, and so on. It'll certainly help as we go down to identifying what we might have in our garden. The second one is, can you find any suspects while we're out there? If you have your hand lens with you, are you getting real close and seeing if you can find any other pests or diseases? And then that third one is if we can find that evidence or damage. And we'll kind of get into what that might look like here in a minute. So what is that host plant? Oftentimes, you know, for example, here on the left side, we have a potato plant, right? And oftentimes when we are looking up certain potato plant pests, we can see that some of those pests show very iconic signs of damage. So this one here on the left is actually a flea beetle damage. Very iconic of, you know, very, very small holes that you can see have been chewed through the foliage of the potato plant here. And so just from knowing the host plant and what that damage looks like, we didn't even find what that insect is. We haven't even found that insect in the garden, but we find signs of it. So we were able to actually make a good conclusion as to what that is. Another example here in that middle picture is not every insect is, you know, named as simply as the squash bug, right? So just because, you know, we have a bug on a squash, that might not even be what the pest might be. So there are other, you know, insects as well that might feed on an array of plants, like here on the right, aphids. I don't care what you're growing in the garden, you've probably seen aphids on that stem right there as they congregate, which they have a pretty cool life history I could get in for talking about 20 minutes as well. A little bit of other examples too. I've seen whiteflies in my garden lately. Tons of Japanese beetles are starting to pop up more and more as we come through the summer. And, you know, that's just very iconic damage from both that whitefly there on the bottom left, where they leave a secretion of honeydew left over on the plant. You know, at first glance, you might think, oh, that could be powdery mildew, but you get a little bit closer in and you can really see just those traces of that honeydew. And then Japanese beetles, you can kind of see a little lace-like, you know, where they've chewed all around that major vein of the plant, of that foliage. So another great example there. And as we're going through the fruit orchard, this is something we might see later in the season, but just to keep an eye out. But are some new invasive pests that might be coming through. Specific to fruit, we have this one called the spotted wing Drosophila. And this is just a prime example of, a lot of pests that can, select a multitude of crops where, blueberries, blackberries, just about any fruit can be oviposited and eaten from this spotted wing Drosophila. So we kind of talked about some bad insects, but it's always good to know the good ones as well. So if you're out there, trying to hand pick some of those bad insects off, we want to leave the good ones in the garden to do that job for you. And some quick, the 3 Ps, as I like to call it, are the predators, parasitoids, and pollinators. And so if we can get a gist as to, those predators are those that are giving biological control or biocontrol, where they're actually feeding on some of your pests for you. So great beneficial insect for your gardens. The iconic picture here is a praying mantis that's chewing down, but some of the other predators we might think of are, lady beetles, spiders. The list goes on about all the different beneficials. The second one is a parasitoid. And so what that does is it actually inserts its eggs inside of a caterpillar or a pest that might be in your garden. So that will then hatch from that inside of that caterpillar. It's a pretty cool beneficial service provided. And that third P is, of course, our beloved bees and pollinators. So that's always beneficial. And, that's one thing that we're trying to not remove from our garden, and making great integrated pest management decisions to promote our honeybees as well. And so one prime example of, I actually took this picture. We had one of our demonstration plots with a bunch of sun sugar tomatoes here. And we actually sell our tomato hornworm here. And we found these little white egg masses on the back of this caterpillar. And so we know that this is a pest, right? But, we had a decision to make if we want to remove this pest or allow those egg masses that are parasitizing that caterpillar to survive. And so we actually waited a few days, let nature take its course there on that tomato hornworm. And those parasitoids were able to hatch from those egg masses. And this is a few days later of that same exact caterpillar. And you can really see how, that's a biological service, biocontrol service provided to our garden. So it's great to promote those as well, and also remove our pests at the same time. And as an entomologist, oftentimes, we got to know just about every body part of an insect. But as master gardeners and home gardeners that might be looking out for different insects, the main body part we want you all to be familiar with is the mouth parts. They're at number 32. So all insects will have, different types of feeding characteristics and mouth parts that leave the evidence for us to diagnose. So, some examples of crop damage that we might see here in a little bit as we go through the fields are, chewing, sucking mouth parts, where they might be actually sucking the sap from the plants, chewing the foliage. Maybe they're laying their eggs within the tissue of the crops. Maybe they're spreading diseases. Aphids are very known to spread diseases as they go through each plant and go from one plant to another. Internal feeding, where they're actually carving and navigating within the plant. Subterranean, like the Japanese beetle feeding at the roots. And even galls can be produced as a plant defense mechanism. So this is just a wide range of evidence that we might see as we're playing Sherlock Holmes on our crops. And so one example of that is the fall armyworm, which if you can't find this caterpillar out in your cornfield or anything, or your corn plot, you can certainly find evidence of it with the window panes that might be occurring along that corn. And if you do find that caterpillar, it's great to identify the fall armyworm with that Y on its forehead right there as well. So there's a great example of chewing damage on corn right there. Sucking and piercing. So you're seeing discoloration maybe on the fruiting bodies, or maybe discoloration on the foliage, and that could be due to the red-banded leafhopper that might actually promote the spread of diseases, and then the brown marmorated stink bug, where you can actually see that sucking mouth part, that straw sucking into our crops. And so when they're sucking, what they're doing is they're transmitting and vectoring a lot of the pathogens from one plant to another. So oftentimes we attribute diseases to being spread by air, and that is true, but they're also spread by aphids and other insects that might be sucking on our plants. So managing both insects and fungus and other pathogens really takes the same kind of scouting out in the garden. And always know, and you have your resources available. Publication 595 is one of my favorite publications to go through on controlling garden insects. There's also publication W661 that does an excellent suggestions for vegetable gardeners for different types of products that we can use out in our garden. And it's always good to go out there with a hand lens and maybe our cameras as well as we go out there. Because if you guys can't identify or really get down to the bottom of it as a Sherlock Holmes, we can always search and find that answer for each other, right, as master gardeners. And in doing that, knowing the host plant and going through those clues to find those quality pictures of maybe the sides of the insects or the ventral sides of the insects certainly goes a long way. And so I'm going to real quick also show a different screen here and show you guys a few examples of what we had talked about. Can everybody see my microscope right here?
Yeah, Seth, that's awesome.
Awesome. So you see right here I have a Japanese beetle. So this Japanese beetle, one of the lace-like feeding habits that we see chewing on our plant foliage, this is the culprit. This is our suspect. He's guilty. And so a great way to identify these Japanese beetles is, of course, all beetles have these elytra. And I'll see if I can point at this right here. And so this bronze elytra is their hind wing. And it's very bronze there, and you can actually see up here a little bit more metallic green. And so another characteristic of if we think we find a Japanese beetle is if we look at its sides, we can actually see, let's see if I can focus this. We can actually see lines of tufts of hair, white hair. And usually there's about 6 lines of white hair there to identify this Japanese beetle. And so it's a very, beautiful beetle once we get close to it, but very, very damaging to a wide array of plants. And so oftentimes, just because we have a metallic beetle doesn't mean it's a Japanese beetle. So another example that I'd like to show you guys of another metallic beetle is the rainbow scarabid. And so although it is metallic, we can see its elytra are metallic green right here on the bottom. And it's actually going to be bronze more on its upper side right here. And so just maybe a commonly mistaken Japanese beetle, but it's actually the rainbow beetle, and actually not harmful for our gardens, and is kind of just a dung beetle for our garden as well. So just an example there. And while we're on the metallic beetles, I also wanted to show you all what a flea beetle would look like. And so this flea beetle, sorry, the lighting's not very good on this one, but it's almost a, bluish green shiny beetle here. I kind of showed one picture earlier in the presentation of that very, very small holes on the potato leaf foliage, if you could remember that. And this is the culprit, the flea beetle. And they have these very large back legs that is, what they're named for, as they're able to hop and jump off that plant so quickly. So another very damaging beetle that we might see early season. And so a little of what other sucking damage might look like. I kind of have a different array here of, just what these pests are sucking with. And it can really range. And so I love this one right here in the middle here on the right. I'll see if I can point to it right here. We have a weevil with that sucking straw-like mouth part. And so, that's one of our worst. This one isn't the plum curculio, so don't get it confused, but it looks very similar to the plum curculio in the fact that it actually can suck into a lot of our apples and other fruit that we might have as well. Here on the left, we have almost a straw-like sucking mouth part. It's kind of hard to see there in the middle of its face. But this is actually a plant bug that can also suck into our plants. But I'd like to just show the different mouth parts that we kind of talked about. But I have tons of insects, and I'll stop sharing, and I could just go on and on with this dino light. But I know I kind of went over my time, but hopefully that kind of gave us a good beginning segue into other scouting as we go into the fields.
Oh, Seth, that was awesome. We really appreciate that. And if you have questions and conversation, by all means, feel free to drop that in the chat box. We're going to pass the proverbial microphone to Greg over on the plateau.
All right. Thanks for everybody tuning in. A couple of things I wanted to start out with. Just show you something here in the apple orchard, and I'll try and get this up to the screen. It's not my dino light, but maybe you can see a couple of things going on with this apple. And Seth was talking about the things that we might see. Well, this first big crack that I see down on my apple here is one of those things that really I can't do anything about, because that was back from some of the winter injuries that we got early in the season here on the plateau. A lot of freezing damage. This year I'm going to have a decent apple crop. Not going to be much in terms of winemaking here on the plateau this coming fall, because probably 75% of the grape crop has been taken out by winter injury.
I'm going to break in and just give a little technical note. Up in the top right-hand corner of your screen, if you'll hit speaker view instead of gallery view, what it'll do is always give you a wide screen on the person that's talking. So when we move to cameras, that's what you'll want if you can't see a large Greg. All right.
Yeah, put me on speaker view. There you go. All right. So the other one is a little scar here. This crescent moon shaped scar is from the plum curculio, which is an insect feeding that causes damage to the fruit tree. That's one that I can have control over in the orchard. And I can tell that when I was doing my spray schedule this year and kind of going through, I was a little bit late when I started, as Seth was talking earlier, scouting through my apple trees. And then I'm actually identifying the plum curculio damaging my apples. And so I knew I needed to get on my spray schedule. Now, a couple of things as we start talking about spray schedule, and I got me a few notes here to go down through. Safety first. Can't overemphasize that. I tell people in pesticide safety programs, most people don't set out to intentionally poison themselves. And so, use some common sense. The first thing that we want to do is not only read the label, but follow the label and have a good understanding what that label says. I've got a couple of products that's listed back here. One Captan wettable powder, and another one that is a mancozeb powder that I have used. Well, I'm moving more to the Captan right now because that's kind of my in-season cover spray. But in reading and following the label guideline on this mancozeb, you've got a 66-day harvest, post-harvest interval. So basically, from a standpoint of using it, on my grapes and my apples, I'm done with that one. So I've got to move to products that I can use for the season. So read and follow the label. Label's the law, and I can't tell you anything different. personal protective equipment. We hear all about COVID. It's also what we're wanting to make certain that we're doing in terms of us spraying. Long sleeve shirts, long sleeve pants. You can see I've got some latex gloves down here. So I always try to be above and beyond cautious myself in terms of spraying those. A lot of times here on the plateau, spraying can be a little bit of challenge here at my mom's. If you've seen me do these presentations before, you've heard me talk about really good air drainage. Well, this place has really good air drainage because it's hard to find a day that the wind is light enough to really get in and apply that spray correctly. Now, before you go to spraying, you need to make certain that you've got that sprayer calibrated. And you can see the sprayer here behind me is one actually that my father kind of bought a 25-gallon spray pump and actually engineered himself his own fan here, turbine fan, to basically apply spray. But I've also got a wand sprayer here attached for doing more precise spraying. The one thing before I ever even started using this, I actually filled it up with water and made a couple of passes through the orchard and the vineyard as if I was doing my spray. What would I do to spray? Because I wanted to find out what it took in terms of water to cover the areas that I was spraying. And by having a known quantity of what I was spraying, I'm able to more precisely apply my fungicides. In the orchard I have here, basically it's a third of an acre in terms of size. 22 gallons of water is what it will apply. Man, I mean, I could just about set a watch to how much that I apply each time that I spray. So I know the volume of water that I'm putting out, and then that way I can be more precise in terms of what I want to use in terms of those fungicides and insecticides. That's pretty important. I deal a lot of times with homeowners that will purchase the all-in-one fruit spray that happens to have a insecticide in called carbaryl. A lot of people would know that by 7. In the commercial apple industry, carbaryl is actually used as a thinning agent to have fruit drop off. And so it's one that if you over-apply it early in that season, it can cause every one of your apples to drop from that tree. Read the label, follow the label, and be very precise in terms of what you want to apply. So Seth talked about a minute ago some of those UT publications. The one 1622 is one that we love using for home orchards. It's very basic. The one that I've got right here is talking about apples and pears and basically gives me that spray schedule as to what to follow all down the line in terms of when and what to spray. You want to be making certain that you're applying the correct herbicide at the correct time at the correct rate. So do your homework, have a plan. Fail to plan, plan to fail. Now, basically, these trees have been sprayed every 7 to 10 days since back in February, starting with the dormant oil spray and following through. About the only spray period that I did not really get on those was during the bloom period to protect those pollinators. So I stayed away from the spray. But after that petal fall and getting a little bit later, I know I was getting late in terms of applying my malathion because I saw more evidence of that plum curculio that was actually in my orchard. So timing. Make certain that you know what you're doing in terms of your guidelines, and don't do what I call revenge sprays, where you're spraying that product after you've seen all the signs and symptoms and everything else and all the damage is done, and you're just spraying to kind of be spraying because it makes you feel better. So I can't overemphasize the timing. Fungicides generally need to be applied prior to those rain events because we want that protective barrier on those plants during that period of wet weather. Same with insecticides, applying those when we'll see those hatch or whenever we can see the greatest incidence of damage. And I don't know that you can really see, and maybe I'll pan around here a little bit, how I really had this orchard floor clean back early in the season with my herbicide applications, but we've got a really good crop of Pennsylvania smartweed and some other weeds that have really come in to the orchard here in the last week or so. I'm really apprehensive about using herbicides this late in the season, particularly as we get into July, because we have those plants translocating so much energy to the root system. We can certainly have some damage with those trees if we apply those at the incorrect time. So one thing that I wanted to make a note to as well, if you're planting these trees, and obviously we think about, in this case, apple trees, because we've got to have those suitable pollinators. One thing that I would tell you to do that's not done in this orchard, so do as I say, not it was done 20 years ago, make certain that you block those trees together. If you've got those light trees that are blooming at the same time, fruiting at the same time, harvested at the same time, makes it a lot easier in terms of that spray control program. And one of the things that kind of hurts me a little bit in this home orchard is the diversity of the planting, trying to protect those pollinators through the bloom. A lot of times puts me a little bit later in terms of putting those insecticides. And as I can see in the plum Coryleo, those problems can show up. So block your plants together so you can do a little bit better job in terms of those applications out there. Now, one thing I also wanted to talk a little bit about in terms of the home orchard, a few things that I've got here. Now, I'll just kind of span this camera around just a little bit. I don't know if you can see my small Honeycrisp apple here. I'm basically growing that one for my brother-in-law. I'm trying to stay in good graces with my brother-in-law, Steve Edwards. I've got my clothespins here set up in this tree. Some of my master gardeners and homeowners maybe attended one of my pruning sessions earlier in the season. This was a tree that basically I took every one of the limbs off of, pruned it down to just a bare stub. I've started those limbs over, and now I'm actually starting the spacing and flattening those limbs out so I can grow this apple tree out to where those limbs will have the correct set to capture sunlight for those leaves and open those up and have a strong collar attachment. The big taller limb that we've got out here, that's going to be my central leader for right now. But again, in the training process of trying to train that tree. So again, this year probably a little bit more challenging here on the plateau just because of our weather and those weather events and how they've really taken a toll on our fruit crops. That's one of those things that homeowners, you really don't have any control over unless we really start talking about that site selection. And I can't overemphasize, if there's one thing, you know, I talk about all the time, is right plant, right place. When we're trying to grow these fruits and vegetables, they're fun, they're full sun-loving plants. And so we need to think about sunlight. We need to think about good airflow, good drainage, good air movement through those sites. Those alone will help us more than anything in terms of trying to control a lot of those disease pressures that we might see on those trees. And then with good scouting, we can kind of control some of those insect pressures that we find on those trees. And then lastly, I would tell you, really think about that cultivar selection. I know browsing through here, there's some of these trees. This Honeycrisp is one that a lot of homeowners may see in those box stores that they really want to grow. If you're one of these homeowners that says, I want a limited low spray. Now, in an orchard in the southeast, there's no such thing as a no spray. Now, you may choose to go a true organic route, but in terms of being really successful, you need to be using some types of sprays, whether it's lime sulfurs or dormant oils, those type sprays to control scale insects and control some of these diseases best that you can. So the one thing that I would tell you, cultivar selection is critical. You know, we're putting a lot of publications out there, and there'll be a new one that's released here at some point in time that we'll talk about caneberries, strawberries, the grapes, and we'll talk about apple varieties. And in that publication, we'll list some of those more recommended varieties that we would tell you to select just so you can go more towards that low spray, or non-spray type program. So with that, I think that's kind of covered all my bases here, with the exception of running the sprayer. And Natalie, I'll turn it over to you and let you go. And then if we've got time at the end, if they want to see me fire up the old air blast sprayer, we'll do that at the very end.
All right, that sounds excellent. So that kind of gives you an overview of what's going on in the fruit orchard right now. And I am actually going to give a little bit of an overview of some of the things that we're seeing in terms of our vegetable crops. So I'm going to start with a few pictures here, because not all of these things are occurring right now at the same time in our plots, but these are all pictures that have been taken from right here in my Knoxville trials in the month of June. So so this is what the trial plots look like right now. Brooke's going to take you out there in just a little bit. But I wanted to show some close-up pictures to kind of tag on to what both Greg and Seth had been saying, and give you some very practical examples of how we manage and what we look for when we're scouting in the vegetable garden. So this is our organic crops unit. We have some plots that are certified organic and some that are not. So I grow in an uncertified plot, just so you know. If I talk about, you know, using any traditional fungicides, that would be the reason. And this is just a couple of scenic shots from my favorite places right here at the organic farm. And so this is what our plants look like right now. This is one of our young determinate tomatoes, and then we've also got a few that are showing this symptomology. And I've gotten questions about leaf rolling this week, right? We actually had perfect, I say, conditions for leaf rolling. And so this is an example of physiological leaf roll. We had a moist spring where, you know, we had a lot of, you know, soil retention of moisture because of all that rain. And then we got into a hotter, dry spell. And so that was actually a transition that really leads to this physiological condition. And so what's the plant doing? Well, it's trying to shield itself from light, lower that leaf temperature. And that's one of the reasons why, you know, it's rolling. So this is not a disease. It is not a pest. It is, it's simply kind of a stress response. Now, can we cause that stress? Yeah, you know, if we sucker prune and remove a lot of leaf material headed into you know, a hot period, then that can definitely lead to some of these conditions. But physiological leaf roll is something that we'll see a lot in the early part of the season. Now, I tend to see it kind of differentially on different cultivars. This is actually a picture of Cherokee Purple, which tends to be one of the cultivars that I see roll the most. So it can be a little bit cultivar dependent, but not typically something that we worry about. But a physiological condition. Now, when we're talking about, you know, leaf rolling or cupping, this is a totally different phenomenon, right? This is actually a little touch of herbicide damage, and so it can drift for a pretty long ways. And when we see, you know, what you saw in that physiological leaf roll was kind of a linear roll, right? It was even throughout the leaf. Here we're seeing cupping up. We can also see cupping down. So those, and you can see a little bit of that distortion in the leaf vein. So those are all some things that that clue us in that it might be herbicide. And I will say, we have seen a lot of pictures of various kinds of herbicide damage this spring. So whether it be uptake from mulches or just a little bit of drift like we're seeing here is something that I personally have seen a lot of pictures come through. Another early season thing that I like to really keep a close eye for is anything that looks like, this is actually TSWV, tomato spotted wilt virus, which is probably the most common virus that we'll see in our tomato plants. We can also, you know, see it in some of the other solanaceous crops like peppers. And most of the time when I see it, now this is not completely universal, but lots of times it'll come in on transplants because it is spread by thrips, right? A small insect that is really common in greenhouses. And so sometimes when we'll see it, it'll be in the early season because thrips are really hard to completely eliminate from greenhouses. And so if there's a population of them and there's feeding, they can spread this virus and the plants can be infected. And then when you plant them, you'll see some of those signs come out early in the season. I said virus, right? And so when we look at virus symptoms, you know, anything that kind of looks like a mosaic, this would be really characteristic. But I've also seen it almost just like crisping up and burning, right? We'll also see some stunting and a little bit of general curling of those leaves. So what do? We rogue out those plants because we can't treat viruses in existing plants. What we want to do is make sure that we get them out of the field so that any feeding damage that occurs, we don't have it being transmitted through our field. Okay, here's one that you know, right? This is what we're always keeping our eye out for. This is early blight, right? So alternaria, probably the most common leaf disease that we see. And right now, in our trials, we are managing early blight in two ways. One is by sanitation, right? So when we just have a little bit of leaf damage, we are going through and roguing out any leaf damage that that we're seeing, any necrosis, right? Any dead tissue, anything that looks like it could be early blight. Because how does that disease spread the most in season? From infected leaves to infected leaves, right? Sometimes we could get some soil splash, that's true, but it's moving leaf to leaf is one of the most common ways that it spreads. So we're roguing out, we're sanitizing. This is actually a picture that I took yesterday. So this is sometimes what it might look like at the early stages. We're trying to be as precise as possible and roguing out all those leaves. And on a small planting, pulling out any diseased leaves can be a great way to just really reduce that inoculum load. The other thing that we're doing is spraying at least once a week. And so Greg told you a little bit about the way that he sprays in his orchard. I'm going to say that we are just a little bit more, low tech here. So I have a 4-gallon backpack sprayer, and all of those plots that you're going to see here in a little bit get sprayed by hand. And so right now, we're cycling copper, and lots of times I'll use daconil. So lots of times I'll kind of go back and forth to get different modes of action. And I'm typically putting on a fungicide at least once a week. These are protective materials. They don't have great curative roles, so we need to keep those leaves protected. And right now, knock on wood, things look pretty good. We've had dry conditions for the last couple of weeks, and so our leaf disease load is looking pretty low, and we want to keep it that way. When we're spraying with something like a copper or something like a daconil as a protective fungicide, coverage is essential. And so, as Greg said, the label is the law, but most of the time what they'll say is spray to the point of runoff, right? We want to cover those leaves well, but we don't want them just dripping spray material. And so application, making sure that your nozzles are clean, and that you're delivering a good volume to get a fine coat, and good coverage is really essential. And so mixing, Greg talked a little bit about how he calculates coverage. For a lot of what we're doing, it's a little bit simpler, right? How many ounces or tablespoons do we need per gallon? I'll mix up 3 or 4 gallons at a time and just keep spraying until I get good coverage on the plants. So sometimes we're making our calculations based on the volume of water that we're applying, a simple material mixed into our sprayer per volume, and sometimes we're spraying how much active ingredient do we need for this acreage. So it's all knowing how to follow that label. A few of the insects that we see this time of year, Seth already talked about aphids. It's pretty common for me to see a few populations of aphids in the tomatoes. I don't worry too much about them. The cool thing here, you can see some cast skins. Those are not whiteflies. They are aphids that have shed and move on. Most of the time, between the different kinds of predators in the garden, we keep pretty good care of our aphids. This is a lacewing, one of my favorite predators. Here, this is a sad, ugly picture of a pink Berkeley tie-dyed tomatoes. The best thing that those tomatoes were good for were being a home for lacewing eggs. So you can, if you keep a close eye on what's going on in the garden, you can actually see your beneficials, as they move through the life cycle. So on these kind of tomatoes, you know, I'll try to leave them there as long as possible so that I have time for these lacewing eggs to hatch. But I will try to hold off on putting any insecticide on those tomatoes so that I can protect these beneficial insects in the planting. Of course, this is a ladybug larva. They're great feeders for the small aphids in the greenhouse and in the field. Here's one that I don't ignore, right? So this one, you know, as one of the really sets some great pictures that already had all kinds of, you know, cocoons and everything on it being parasitized. But this one is a very nice, healthy tobacco hornworm. And so tobacco has one row of white lines, and its little horn is kind of reddish. Tomato, if you grew up in more northern areas, you probably saw tomato more, and its white lines are V's, and it has a black horn. But the treatment is the same. So I use a lot of BT or dipel, thuricide, and as a biological material that's very targeted. It doesn't affect a lot of my beneficials. And whether it be physical removal or some cover sprays, I take the hornworms pretty seriously. And here's another caterpillar pest that I take pretty seriously. This is yellow-striped armyworm. And they have, 2 years ago, we just had an awful yellow-striped armyworm year. They're leaf feeding, but where they really got me was they will actually feed on young fruit. And so just a little bit of fruit damage, then that fruit starts to decay. And so these I watch really closely for any early leaf feeding and certainly any young fruit feeding. And so thuricide, BT, right, what works for hornworm works for yellow-striped armyworm. And this is one that I really try to pay close attention to. This is a leaf that I just want to kind of show you. This is kind of the mindset of how, you know, I scout when I'm walking through the field. I'm looking for any leaves that look like they might show any sign of kind of yellowing or stippling. And so I'm keeping a close eye on all of these leaves, because anytime I'm seeing some of those yellow or looks like small pinprick points on the top of this leaf, then there could be things that I'm looking for on the bottom of this leaf. So this is kind of an early stage of some spider mites. And so early stage spider mites we're going to see on the undersides of our leaves. If we see them on the tops of the leaves, the infestation is pretty severe. So I'm always looking for any spot that I might see what looks like spider mite feeding coming through on the top of my leaf, and then I'm inspecting closely on the undersides of these leaves. So of course, Seth mentioned your hand lens. That's a great idea. You know, if you had a hand lens, you could look closely and probably be able to see a little bit of spider mites on the underside of those leaves. So, you know, if there's just a few, I'll pull those leaves. But, you know, I'm getting neem oil on, or horticultural oil. Greg actually mentioned the horticultural oil. I'll use that for spider mites too. Soaps and oils, those physical control materials are probably some of the best things that we have. There aren't a lot of miticides that are labeled for home gardens. And so catching them early is the key to spider mites, because when spider mites get to this point, it's bad, right? This is a heavy infestation, and it takes a long time to get those beat back. Winter spider mites are the most challenging for us under hot, dry conditions, low humidity. They really like to reproduce under those conditions. So we keep our eye out and really look closely when we start to get into the heat of summer, because their populations can really build quickly. Where do they come from? Well, sometimes for me, they're actually on the young plants when they go into the field. That's why I'm scouting those leaves so closely early in the season. This is one of our common culprits, right? It's common for us to have a lot of different kinds of plants in the greenhouse, and those strawberries are some of the culprits for bringing spider mites in and getting my tomatoes early in the season. One less mite I wanted to show you. This is something that I saw in the trials last year, which was the very first time that I'd ever seen it. And this is broad mite, which is a much smaller mite. And it actually feeds on the young growing points and the young buds, and you can see just this distortion all through the plant. This is about 3 weeks later, and this is with 2 or 3 applications of just horticultural oil. And so, you know, those physical methods are some of the best way to deal with mites. And over time, we were able to get good control over those broad mites. So, it's all about keeping your eyes open, looking for things that are different, identifying them correctly, and treating. I was spraying horticultural oil at 4 or 5 day intervals. You've got to be careful in the summertime with oil because it can be hot. You can get into a lot of leaf burning, and actually you can see a little bit of leaf burning down there. But for me, the leaf burning was actually worth it because I just needed to get good coverage over all of those growing points. So that's just a little bit of an overview of some of the things that we've been seeing in the garden. Oh, I thought I had 2 more pictures. Sorry, I forgot to show you. In most of our tomatoes and peppers, this is what was our most challenging pest this year. Actually, we're fighting right now. And if you've seen any of this, this is cucumber beetle, right? So striped and spotted cucumber beetle. They love to feed on young leaves and cotyledons. They actually like cucurbitacin, which is a compound that is produced by young squash plants, and they can actually, when they feed on it, they can use it then as their own defense compound. And so these are adult beetles feeding on young plants, and they can just decimate a young planting. So feeding damage, this is the striped cucumber beetle right here, little rascal. And this was something that we had in our plots for the first time this year. The larva can actually feed on young seedlings even in the ground. So we had some young die-off damage from cucumber beetles even at a young stage. This is what early cucumber beetle feeding damage looks like. You can see we got insecticide spray on it, and the next set of leaves are in pretty good shape, but this will be what that young damage will look like. Here's some cucumber shots, a little bit more advanced. Gosh, there might even be one in the picture right there. So we care about it because it can really stunt and damage young plants, but we also care about it because that striped cucumber beetle can carry the bacterium for bacterial wilt with it, right? So by feeding damage or by leaving, fecal material on the leaves that can then infect in those wounds, we can get bacterial wilt. So on cucumbers, on muskmelons, watermelons, we don't typically have to deal with. Squash, all of those can be problems with bacterial wilt. So how do we control bacterial wilt? We control it by controlling the cucumber beetle. And so I was telling you about how I try not to go too hard on the insecticides in the plots. For tomatoes, peppers and things like that, that's true. Those cucumber beetles, that'll be the spot that I'll apply oftentimes a conventional insecticide for a couple of times early in the season, because you just got to get on it fast because they can do so much damage so quickly. So that kind of gives you a little bit of an overview of what we've been seeing in our plots. I am going to pass the baton to Brooke. I think she's in the field, and let her kind of give you a little bit of an on-site tour, and I'll look through the chat box and see if there's anything I need to catch up on there.
Let me see. All right. Hey, guys. I'm out in the plots. Let me turn my camera around. So right now I'm standing in the cucurbit section. We've got 3 plastic rows here of the cucurbits. And so this row here, we've got our melons, our muskmelons, watermelon, and a couple little guys. And then over here, we have our squash and zucchini. And so keeping with the management aspects we've been looking at today for insects, first I'm going to show you we have some cucumber feeding damage here on this young plant. And in this same area, so they hit these ones pretty early. And so this is the difference. See, this large plant was from the first planting. They left those alone. But here they came and damaged these ones. So we replanted them, and they're still young and still being hit pretty hard. So that's a pretty big difference from a first couple weeks of the season. Then we'll come over. This is a row of cucumbers, and they're coming in pretty well. We had to replant them several times because for the same problems, but they're looking good now. We've got a pretty good stand coming up for most of our trials here. Oh, and I should probably explain. So all these trials we're doing are part of the home garden variety trials, which if any of you are taking part in that, it was where you could order a trial of 2 different cultivars of a cucumber, squash, zucchini, any of that, and trial the 2, compare the similar ones together, and return your results. So we grow all of those as well. And so at the end of the season, we'll be taking yield data and taste testing them to see which we think grew better here in Knoxville, and we'll compare them to the results that the rest of you guys turn in at the end of the season. So over here, we've got our different tomato rows where we're also trialing different cultivars of, we usually do like some trusted, tried and true cultivars, and then we test them against some newer varieties. So we'll see how those work out at the end of the season as well. We've got 3 rows of tomatoes. And then over here, we've got the pepper rows. We've got our hot peppers, sweet peppers, and big bell peppers. And then, so over here, we'll take a closer look at some of the peppers because they're starting to really come into their growth here. They're doing a lot better. And then we've got a bean row. We've got pole beans at the end, and then one trial of okra at the very back. And let's see, what else? Just a couple other tidbits about the garden
We had a
here.
question about
So
whether
for
that
weed
soil
control,
was as red as it looked like. And yeah, that's the real deal. That's East Tennessee red
oh,
clay. Yeah,
yes,
that's true, right? It stains all of our blue jeans.
we've got the red clay. No, every day I go home, I can't tell if I got really tan or if I'm really dirty. And then just a couple other tidbits. For weed control, we do a plastic mulch that we lay down with the tractor first at the beginning of the season, where our drip takes that. And then in between these skinny rows here, between the peppers and the tomatoes, we use straw to keep the weeds down. But this year, some wheat seeded and grew up also. So we've been chopping that back down. And then over in the cucurbit section, we also lay down some landscape fabric in between the larger rows. And so we do all of that to keep the weeds down, to lower the amount of times we need to till in between the rows, and to lower the manual labor of hoeing every day. And let's see, yeah, are there any questions I could answer about our plots out here?
I'm gonna jump in and answer a couple of questions that we've had about some of the materials that I was talking about. So I referenced horticultural oil and I referenced neem oil. So they're similar somewhat in their action, right? Because they're a physical material that suffocates the plant. Horticultural oil is actually a mineral oil, right? But it's, you know, organically approved most of the time, OMRI listed, those kinds of things. Neem oil is actually a botanical extract from the neem tree. And so it does have that oil physical effect, but it also has some other properties as far as, you know, having some of the anti-pedant and those kinds of things. If you use Azamax, those kinds of other botanical insecticides, those are the active ingredient from neem oil. So azadirachtin is an anti-pedant. It also interrupts the growth processes in the insect. So it's an organic insecticide that also has multiple properties. All of these are, you know, low post-harvest interval, you know, all those kinds of things make them simple to use, but they're oil products, so we have to be careful in the heat. That's the main thing about the summer to think about. I think that Greg might have been walking to another spot in the orchard. I wanted to give him a chance if he was with his grapes right now.
Well, actually, no, I stayed here in the apple orchard, but I've got the air blast. If you want me to kind of demonstrate, I can fire the tractor up and kind of show you a little bit about, you know, again, when we start spraying on a larger scale, we've got more than that 2 apple trees at home, then obviously we've got to go to something that gives you a little bit better coverage. And I generally use this fan sprayer, this squirrel cage fan, early in the season of my apples, and after that I'll go to a wine sprayer because I can do a better job. But the squirrel cage fan is critical for the grapes because of the interaction of the air and how it covers. Just a little bit of a glance of what that is. It's just a simple old swirl cage fan that's been hooked to a pulley system that runs off the PTO and basically has a set of nozzles that blows the spray out. And what I'll do is I'll crank that up and kind of give you an example of what that does. And this would be in the vineyard, would be really turning it. Natalie used it several times in her talk. Coverage, 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 coverage. And I talked about it took 22 gallons of water to get really good coverage on this orchard. And I mean, I've got it down to where I know exactly, so I can formulate that. But for right on cue, I run a test and I broke a nozzle off. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of repair on my air sprayer before I blast it out there, because it's not going to do what it's supposed to do. So
that's a reality of farming right there.
That is farming in a nutshell.
Yeah. And you had a good question, Greg, about your sprayer. That is actually homemade, but there are some of those that are commercially available. I think that was a farmer engineered cost saving device, right, Greg?
Yes, and actually, again, it works very effective. Like I say, though, I've got a nozzle here that has gone bad, that I'm going to have to fix this nozzle because it's not spraying. But the nozzles are just directing the fan or the spray into the fan. And as the pressure builds, it'll actually do a really nice job. It'll spray to the top of these trees. Really, as you saw, the air churns up, it rolls the leaves every which direction and does an extremely good job. And so, yes, you can buy commercial fan type sprayers like this, but this was just one. My dad had the swirl cage fan and the ingenuity to just plumb the nozzles into it, and we've used the same setup for probably a good 20 years. So very cost effective and low budget, but does a nice job in terms of getting our sprays on. Refer to those publications. Keep an eye out on some of these new releases that we've got that our home fruit and vegetable work group will be releasing. There'll be a great amount of information on site selection, cultivar selection, different things for Tennessee home fruit growers, targeting everything from apples to the blueberries, the caneberries, the strawberries. Some great information, and appreciate everybody tuning in today.
We really appreciate y'all joining in. Hope you had good time, gotten some valuable information for your. If you have additional questions, you know who we are. Feel free to shoot us some information.